There's a pattern on casino floors that most people never notice. It doesn't involve big wins, it doesn't involve jackpots, and it doesn't look unusual at first. But if you watch closely, you'll see a small group of players who do something very different. They sit down at a slot machine, spin a few times, and then leave. No frustration, no chasing losses, no waiting for a big moment. Just a short session, and they're gone. And what's interesting is this: casino floor supervisors notice them. Not because they're loud, not because they're winning, but because their behavior doesn't follow the usual pattern. Section 1. The typical player pattern. To understand why this stands out, you first need to understand how most players behave. A typical session doesn't look short. It starts small. A few spins, a small win, maybe a near miss. Then the session continues, not because something big happened, but because nothing ended it. Players don't usually decide to stay. They just don't decide to leave. And that's where time starts to stretch. 5 spins become 20. 20 becomes 50. And before the player realizes it, they are deep into a session they never planned. Section 2. The first 10 spins. The first few spins are different. They are the most controlled part of any session. The player is aware. They're watching their balance. They're thinking clearly. There's no pressure yet, no emotional attachment, no need to recover losses. Everything is still neutral. And that's what makes this moment important, because the first 10 spins are the only part of the session where the player is fully in control. After that, something begins to change. Section 3. What changes after spin 10? It doesn't happen suddenly. There's no clear signal. But after a short number of spins, the session begins to shift. The player becomes slightly more invested. They've already started. They've already spent something. And now continuing feels easier than stopping. This is not a decision, it's a transition from observer to participant. And once that shift happens, behavior begins to follow a different pattern. Section 4. The invisible line. There is an invisible line in every session. Before that line, the player is thinking. After that line, the player is reacting. The problem is, most players don't see where that line is. They don't recognize the moment they cross it. But experienced players do. They understand that once a session moves beyond a certain point, it becomes harder to leave. Not because of the machine, but because of how the mind responds to continuation. Section 5. Why stopping early feels wrong. For most players, stopping after just a few spins feels uncomfortable. It feels incomplete, like something hasn't happened yet. There's an expectation that the session should build towards something, a bonus, a win, a moment. Leaving early feels like walking away too soon. But this feeling is psychological, not logical, because slot machines don't build toward outcomes. They don't track progress. Each spin is independent, and yet the mind expects a sequence. Section 6. The role of momentum. Momentum is one of the strongest forces inside a casino session. Once spins begin, they create rhythm. Spin, result, spin again. The more this loop repeats, the harder it is to interrupt. Stopping after 10 spins means breaking momentum early, before it fully forms. And that's exactly what makes it effective, because once momentum builds, leaving becomes a different decision. Section 7. What casino staff quietly notice. Casino staff are trained to observe patterns, not individual wins or losses, but behavior. And one behavior stands out: players who leave quickly, not in frustration, not after losing everything, but by choice. They arrive, they play briefly, they leave calmly. This pattern is rare because it goes against the natural flow of the casino environment, and anything that goes against the flow gets noticed. Section 8. It's not about winning. Here's where most people misunderstand this pattern. They assume these players are winning. that they leave after hitting something, but that's not what makes them different. What makes them different is not the outcome, it's the duration. They don't wait for a result to decide. They decide first and let the result happen within that limit. This reverses the usual behavior. Instead of play until something happens, it becomes play for a short time, then leave. Section 9. The control window. The first 10 spins create something we can call a control window, a short period where decisions are clear, emotions are low, losses are limited, momentum hasn't formed. Inside this window, leaving is easy. Outside this window, leaving becomes harder. Not impossible, but more difficult. Because now the player is part of the session, not just observing it. Section 10. The question that changes everything. If most players stay longer than planned, and if sessions become harder to leave over time, then the real question is not, which machine should I play? The real question is, how long will I stay once I start? Because once that answer changes, everything about the session changes. And this is where the pattern becomes even more interesting, because stopping after 10 spins is not random, it's not luck, and it's not superstition. It's connected to something deeper. Something about how time, behavior, and probability interact inside a session. Because stopping after 10 spins is not random, it's not luck, and it's not superstition. It's connected to something deeper. Something about how time, behavior, and probability interact inside a session. Section 11. What happens after spin 10? Once a player moves beyond the first 10 spins, the session begins to change shape. Not visibly, not dramatically, but structurally. The player is no longer testing the machine. They are now inside the session. They've committed time, they've committed money, and more importantly, they've committed attention. At this point, continuing feels natural. Stopping feels like interruption. Section 12. The just a few more effect. There's a phrase that quietly extends most sessions. Just a few more spins. It sounds harmless. It feels controlled. But it has no clear boundary. Because after a few more spins, the same thought appears again and again. This creates a loop without a defined ending. Players don't decide to stay longer, they simply repeat the same small decision. Each time it feels insignificant, but together these decisions extend the session far beyond the original intention. Section 13. The shift from decision to reaction. Early in the session, decisions are intentional. After spin 10, they become reactive. A loss leads to another spin. A near miss leads to another spin. A small win leads to another spin. Every outcome becomes a reason to continue. This is where control quietly fades, not suddenly, but gradually. The player is still choosing to spin, but the reason behind each spin is no longer planned, it's triggered. Section 14. Why near misses matter now. After a short session turns into a longer one, near misses begin to feel different. Earlier, they were just outcomes. Now they feel like signals. 2 jackpot symbols appear. The third just misses. And instead of feeling random, it feels meaningful, like something is building. But nothing is building. The machine does not track previous spins. It does not move closer to a result. Each spin remains independent, but the player's perception changes, and that perception keeps the session going. Section 15. The cost of time. Every spin carries a cost, but time multiplies that cost, because more time means more spins, and more spins mean more exposure to the house edge. This is where the real pattern forms, not in single outcomes, but in repetition. A short session limits repetition. A long session increases it. And the more repetition increases, the more the system behaves as designed. Section 16. The house edge becomes visible. At the start of a session, the house edge is invisible. Wins and losses feel balanced. Random, unpredictable. But over time, the edge begins to show. not as a sudden loss, but as a slow shift. Losses begin to outweigh wins. The balance trends downward more consistently, and the session feels different, less chaotic, more controlled. This is not the machine changing, this is probability stabilizing. Section 17. Why most players miss this moment. There is a point in every extended session where the experience changes. It becomes less about possibility and more about pattern. But most players don't notice this shift because it doesn't announce itself. There's no clear signal, no warning, just a gradual transition. And by the time it becomes noticeable, the player is already deep into the session. Section 18. Emotional investment builds quietly. The longer a session continues, the more emotional weight it carries. Even if the player stays calm, there is still investment. Time invested, money invested, attention invested. And this creates resistance to stopping, because leaving now means accepting the current result, and that can feel unfinished. So the session continues, not for a big win, but to avoid ending on the current outcome. Section 19. From the casino's perspective, the ideal player pattern is simple. Start small, stay longer than planned, continue spinning, not because of pressure, but because of flow. Because once a player crosses that early control window, they are more likely to remain engaged. And the longer they remain engaged, the more consistent the system becomes. Section 20. Why smart players look different. This is what separates short sessions from long ones. Not knowledge of machines, not special strategies, but behavior. Players who stop early never enter the extended phase. They never reach the point where repetition begins to shape outcomes. They stay within the control window, where decisions are still clear. And because of that, their sessions look different. Shorter, calmer, less reactive. Section 21. It's not about predicting outcomes. Stopping after 10 spins is not about predicting wins or losses. It's about limiting exposure. Because outcomes cannot be controlled, but duration can. And duration determines how much the system can act. This shifts the focus completely, from will I win to how long will I stay. Section 22. The loop most players don't see. If you step back and observe long sessions, a pattern appears. Spin, react, continue, repeat. There is no clear endpoint, no defined exit, just continuation. This loop is not forced, it's not imposed, it's natural, but it is also predictable. And once you see it, you start to recognize it everywhere. Section 23. The real turning point. The most important moment in any session is not a win. It's not a bonus. It's not a near miss. It's the moment where the player decides whether to continue or stop. And that moment happens early, much earlier than most people think, usually within the first few spins. But it's often ignored, because nothing dramatic has happened yet. Section 24. The question that follows. If most losses come from extended sessions, and extended sessions begin with small decisions, then the question becomes, what would happen if those early decisions changed? If the session ended before momentum formed, before repetition increased, before the system had time to settle, what would that look like? And this is where everything connects. Because stopping after 10 spins is not about a number. It's about timing. It's about understanding when a session is still flexible and when it becomes structured. Section 25. The mathematics of time. Slot machines are built on probability. Every spin is random. Every result is independent. But over time, randomness begins to organize itself. Not into patterns you can predict, but into outcomes that reflect the system's design. This is where time becomes important, because the longer a session lasts, the more chances the system has to apply its edge. Short sessions exist mostly in randomness. Long sessions move closer to expectation. Section 26. What expectation really means. Every slot machine has something called a long-term return. Not for a single spin, not for a short session, but over thousands of spins. This is where the system becomes consistent, not because the machine changes, but because probability stabilizes. In a short session, anything can happen. A player might win, they might lose. It feels unpredictable. But in a long session, the unpredictability fades, and the overall direction becomes clearer. Section 27. Why longer sessions favor the system. The casino does not rely on single outcomes. It relies on volume. More spins, more time, more repetition. Because with enough repetition, the system doesn't need to win big. It just needs to be slightly ahead, consistently. And that consistency only appears over time. This is why session length matters more than individual results. Section 28. The illusion of control. As sessions get longer, players often feel like they are adapting, changing bet sizes, switching machines, trying new approaches. It feels like control, but the underlying system remains the same. Each spin is still independent, each outcome still random. The adjustments may change the experience, but not the mathematics. And because of that, longer sessions do not increase control, they increase exposure. Section 29. Why short sessions feel different. Short sessions don't give the system time to settle. They exist in a space where randomness is still dominant, where outcomes haven't had time to align with expectation. This is why short sessions can feel unusual, sometimes positive, sometimes neutral, sometimes even lucky. But what defines them is not the result, it's the limited exposure. Section 30. The balance between time and outcome. Most players focus on outcomes, wins, losses, bonuses. But the system responds to time, because time determines how many spins occur, and spins determine how often the house edge applies. This creates a simple relationship. More time equals more spins. More spins equals more exposure. More exposure equals more consistency. And that consistency does not favor the player. Section 31. Why the 10-spin idea exists. Stopping after 10 spins is not a rule. It's the concept, a way of staying inside the control window, before momentum builds, before repetition increases, before emotional investment takes hold. It's not about predicting results. It's about limiting duration. Because once duration increases, everything else follows. Section 32. What happens when players ignore it? When players continue beyond that early window, nothing dramatic happens immediately. There is no sudden loss, no instant change, just continuation. But with continuation comes accumulation. More spins, more decisions, more exposure. And slowly, the session becomes something different than what it started as. Section 33. The quiet nature of losses. One of the most important details about slot machines is this: they don't take money quickly, they take it quietly. Small losses, repeated over time, hidden inside normal play. This is why long sessions don't feel extreme. They feel ordinary until the balance is gone. And by that point, the process has already completed. Section 34. The pattern becomes clear. If you step back and observe enough sessions, a pattern begins to emerge. Short sessions remain unpredictable. Long sessions become consistent. Players who stay longer tend to lose more steadily. Players who leave earlier avoid extended exposure. Not always winning, not always losing, but not staying long enough for the system to fully act. Section 35. Why casinos don't need to intervene. There is no need for interference, no need for adjustment, no need for control during play, because the system works on its own. Players extend their sessions naturally. They continue because it feels normal, and that continuation is enough. The design does not force behavior. It allows behavior to develop. Section 36. The final perspective. So when you see a player sit down, spin a few times, and then leave calmly, you're not seeing luck. You're not seeing a secret strategy. You're seeing a different approach to time, a decision made early, before the session takes shape, before momentum builds, before repetition begins to matter. Section 37. The real insight. The difference between most players and smart players is not knowledge, it's timing. Knowing when a session is still flexible and when it is no longer. Because once that point is crossed, leaving becomes harder. Not impossible, but harder than it was at the beginning. Section 38. The question to remember. So the next time a session begins, before the reels spin, before the sounds start, before the first result appears, there's one question that matters more than anything else. How long will this session last? Because once that answer is decided, everything else follows. If this changed the way you see slot machines, take a second to pause. Because most players never notice this pattern, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. If you found this video useful, like the video, share your thoughts in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to see this. And if you want more deep breakdowns like this, make sure to subscribe, because the next video might show you something most players never even realize is happening.